Washington Post polling averages, which these averages are the most stringent out there. The Washington Post is very selective about which polling units they allow into their averages. Right now, the Washington Post polling averages show Harris winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by 2 percentage points. That is a blowout. These are the averages of only state-of-the-art A-plus pollsters. If there's time later on today's show, I will explain how there's been an explosion of right-wing partisan polling units that are attempting to contaminate the polling averages and create the illusion that Donald Trump is doing better than he actually is. In order to claim voter fraud, Trump needs right-wing pollsters showing support for him where there is none. Am I concerned about November 5th? Absolutely. But remember, polls do not reflect the ground game, which in key battleground states can make the difference between 1 to 3 percentage points. Elon Musk is in charge of Trump's ground game, and it's a disaster. Trump, meanwhile, is canceling events all over the country. The excuse he gives is the schedule is just packed. He doesn't have time. Sometimes his campaign will let slip that Trump is tired and needs to rest. But the real reason Trump is canceling these events, the real reason is he cannot fill the rooms. Paul Friedman, a federal judge in Washington, D.C., ordered the Pentagon to release all pertinent information regarding Donald Trump's August visit to Arlington Cemetery. A female cemetery worker said she was physically assaulted by Trump's entourage that day when she tried to stop them from using the sacred burial ground as a photo op. Trump staged the event to mark the 3rd anniversary of Biden pulling us out of Afghanistan, which Republicans insist was botched. It was anything but botched. Anytime you pull out after losing a 20-year war, it's not going to be pretty. Arlington expressly forbids using the cemetery for political purposes, especially photo ops. After being shoved by Trump's campaign staff, that female cemetery worker called the police, and the New York Times reported the woman refused to press charges for fear, she said, of retribution by Trump supporters. American Oversight, a government watchdog, filed a request through the Freedom of Information Act for the police report, which the Pentagon will be releasing on Friday. Be interesting to read. It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Those are the words of Donald Trump back in 2020 after he was told what it would cost after he publicly promised to pay the funeral costs of an American soldier who had been murdered in America. Trump, as president, invited the family of the soldier to the Oval Office and publicly promised to pay for their daughter's funeral. But according to new reporting in the Atlantic magazine, Trump was later told that it would cost him $60 grand. And he turned to his White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and shouted, quote, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a effing Mexican. Don't pay it." According to the Atlantic magazine, Trump wouldn't let this go, and later in the day fumed to unnamed staffers saying, quote, "Can you believe it? Effing people trying to rip me off." Yeah, who do they think they are? Donald Trump? There's been sensational fallout after General Mark Kelly strongly worded comments to the New York Times earlier this week where he clearly stated Donald Trump is in fact a fascist. General Kelly first served as Trump's director of Homeland Security and then became his longest-serving White House Chief of Staff. He has remained relatively quiet since then, and so his words have much greater currency, especially now in the lead-up to Election Day. This immediately on the heels of former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Trump administration, General Mark Milley, calling Donald Trump, quote, "a fascist to the core." General Milley told Bob Woodward he has no doubt that if Trump returns to the Oval Office, Trump will have him court-martialed and arrested. There has never been anything like this in modern American politics, where it is now commonplace for one of the two leading candidates for president to be called a fascist. President Biden's White House press secretary confirmed on Wednesday that yes, President Biden believes Donald Trump is a fascist. Kamala Harris warned Wednesday that Donald Trump wants, quote-unquote, unchecked power. Picking up on General Kelly's comments to the New York Times, Harris said on Wednesday, Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like General John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. She continued, those who once tried to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses would no longer be there and no longer be there to rein him in. That's what Project 2025 is all about, to make sure that he's only surrounded by loyalists. Mark Esper, who served as Donald Trump's defense secretary from 2019 to 2020, said yesterday his former boss, by definition of the word, is a fascist. One thing the American people can never say is they were never warned. We all saw January 6th. Donald Trump, throughout this campaign, has reminded us exactly who he is and what he plans on doing. Those are my words, by the way, not Mark Esper's. He just called Trump a fascist. General Mark Kelly, after remaining relatively silent for the past 4 years, agreed to 3 separate interviews with the New York Times to discuss his fear for a second Trump administration. According to the New York Times, General Kelly said Trump meets the definition of the word fascist. Kelly said, quote, well, looking at the definition of fascism, it's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, and belief in a natural social hierarchy. He went on to say certainly the former president is in the far-right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist for sure, unquote. General Kelly went on to say Trump certainly prefers the dictator approach to government. General Kelly continued, Mr. Trump never accepted the fact that he wasn't the most powerful man in the world. And by power, I mean an ability to do anything he wanted, anytime he wanted. He's certainly the only president that has all but rejected what America is all about and what makes America America in terms of our Constitution, in terms of our values, the way we look at everything, to include family and government. He's certainly the only president I know of, certainly in my lifetime, that was like that. General Kelly said Trump didn't want to be seen with injured war veterans. Trump, he said, had a particular disdain for amputees, telling Kelly, quote, it's not a good look for me. Unbelievable. General Kelly reiterated the words of from his interview with the Atlantic magazine, where he called soldiers who were wounded or died in battle losers and suckers. Kelly said Trump had zero respect for the U.S. Constitution and had no idea that he had sworn an oath to protect it. Last year, during his farewell address after serving 4 years as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley made a not-so-veiled reference to Donald Trump when he reminded everyone that one of the things that makes America special is our soldiers, our military leaders, and our government officials swear an oath of loyalty to our Constitution, not an oath of loyalty to a king, a queen, or a dictator. That is a concept, according to General Mark Kelly, that Donald Trump is incapable of understanding. You're listening to the Mop-Up for October 24th, 2023. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode. So I remain in your feed, and the best way to help me, the best way to help grow this community is by sharing this episode with your friends. Please forward the link to this episode in an email, a text message, or on social media, and let me know in the comments section if you did. I read all your comments. If I get something wrong, please correct me. I think it's obvious I read your comments. It'd be obvious, especially if you watched the previous show. I want to apologize to some of my listeners who have successfully gotten under my skin by constantly telling me to polls. I kind of snapped on the last show and called these listeners stupid for writing that, and I apologize. They're not stupid. Brain-dead imbeciles, but not stupid. No, I understand why people say ignore the polls, but people who say that are not paying attention to the important polls. And this entire country runs on market research and polling. So polls are important. Good polls are important. I shouldn't have snapped, but I get a little angry. We're all a little tense now. Now, look, there will be Medicare for all in America if it polled better than it does. So my suggestion to listeners is pay attention to the good plus polls, because the people in charge are paying attention to them. And if you want something like reproductive freedom, same-sex marriage, passage of the PRO Act, and Medicare for all, you better learn how to move the polls. When the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage more than a decade ago, one of the reasons cited in the decision was polling. Polling showed that the American people are now more accepting of same-sex marriage than they ever were before. So instead of sitting on your ass complaining that the Democrats have given up on Medicare for all, make them do it. And the way you make them do it is move the polls. If you can't move the polls, you can't move your government officials. If there's time, I'll have some interesting information about the polls later on in this show. Please check out shopdavidfeldman.com and pick up my worst case scenario mug. It'll calm you down, especially if you put Jameson in your coffee. We have our Halloween collection. This is a souvenir from the 2029 inaugural ball. And Donald Trump as the editor. Pick up a MAGA cap for your MAGA morons. I love this. Uncle Scam. And if you want to play pick up. I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea. Chef's Apron, my biggest seller. Appearing in Nevada, J.D. Vance picked up on Donald Trump's lie that Kamala Harris never worked at McDonald's when she attended college in the 1980s. Or he could have really appealed to the working class voters by promising to raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour, but that would actually help people. So just lie and say Kamala Harris never had a day job. During her appearance last night on CNN, Kamala Harris told Anderson Cooper, yes, Donald Trump